So we want to dive in today
Yeah.
on how you came to come to Open Book, but I think there's a value statement in your study of the anarchist authors and the Russian authors in particular. And I'll never forget the first time you straightened me out about my misunderstanding and the shit I gave you about anarchy. And it's really opened an inquiry up for me. But if you could underline for people the bottom line value that you come at on the individual, which is totally where we're focused from completely different directions. I really think that's a very important intellectual, ideological foundation for people.
I'm much better able to explain all that now than I would have been when we started Open Book, to be honest. But that said, the roots of the belief system have been there for a long time. So you're correct. And as you and I both know, and I was triggered in a good way, not in the current world conversation, but triggered in a good way by reading your book, Transformed, because it had that self-fulfilling belief cycle, which gave me the way to enter into a study of beliefs that turned into a 600-page book a few years later. So I and Paul, my partner, have always believed in people. And again, it's much clearer to me now. At the time, I think it was more just how we were, in quotes. Now it's a more overt and documented philosophical framework that we work with, but it's really just a positive belief in people. And to your point, this is what my version of anarchism is at its core, is a positive belief in human beings, a belief in that hierarchy, although operationally important in the moment, is not tied to human value or ability. And that when you take those and then you add the belief that decisions are going to be better when you gather more diverse perspectives, it's very supportive of what Open Book is all about. So how we literally got onto Open Book management was I read a book, which is how I've learned a lot of things. It's how I learned about beliefs, was from your book. Open Book came from, as you well know, the book Great Game of Business by Jack Stack and Bo Burlingham, both of whom I now have known for, 25 years. And when I read it, so in the context of beliefs, as you know, I started to look at beliefs in three broad categories: negative beliefs, neutral beliefs, and positive beliefs. And negative beliefs, I look at beliefs as the root system of our lives. We'll come back to this in a future session. Negative beliefs, if they're the root beliefs are the root system, clearly lead to negative outcomes. Neutral beliefs don't do much, and positive beliefs lead to positive outcomes. I would say I had neutral beliefs about Open Book management. We weren't opposed to it. I just never heard of it. So it wasn't like we had thought it was a bad idea or we were opposed to it. It was essentially like somebody brought us an intellectual technology that we had never experienced. And then it was like, well, that totally makes sense, given the beliefs, longstanding beliefs about positive images of humankind, et cetera, that we had always held. This system was far more aligned with what we had wanted to do than the typical accounting methodology, which is what we were taught, like everybody else was taught. So that's really where it came from. And it was an easy sell for us. Open Book is not an easy sell for many organizations because they don't have those underlying beliefs.
Now, I want to go back to pre-Open Book again for a second. I actually don't know if it's pre, but I think the subtitle of All But Your Bacon book says a lapsed anarchist.
Yeah. I'm not that lapsed anymore, but yes. You want to hear the story of that?
Please.
So I studied anarchism in school. In fact, in my e-news this week, I just wrote about Emma Goldman. It would have been her 153rd birthday this week. I studied it in school. I was drawn to it for many reasons. One of which is, I think, just in hindsight, it was a very positive belief in people, and it wasn't about hierarchy, and it was really about helping people to become themselves, which is, of course, what you and Judith have been doing for decades in your own way, right?
Yeah.
So, and I, in hindsight, it's what we've been trying to do at Zingerman's for a long time too. But anyway, so I studied the anarchists. I graduated from University of Michigan. I got a job as a dishwasher, much to my mother's chagrin, mostly so that I wouldn't have to move back home to Chicago. Nothing against Chicago, it's just a little too close to the old ecosystem. And because I took that job as a dishwasher, I stumbled into a line of work that I had never even knew existed, because no one in my family was in business, and it didn't even dawn on me you could do it. And then also into great people. So my partner, Paul Saginaw, who you know well, started that day as the general manager, and that's how we met. So I love food and cooking. I still cook at home every night, and it's still an integral piece of my day-to-day work and my day-to-day life that really matters a lot in terms of bringing beauty and purpose to what I do. That said, there's a lot more to it too, which now includes the anarchist stuff. Anyways, when I started to get into management of kitchens, I tried sort of leaving everyone alone in what I naively perceived to be akin to what anarchist beliefs would tell you to do, in the hope people would just do the right thing. And that failed miserably for many reasons, which I could now explain, which isn't anarchism's fault, it was my fault. But and that's sort of where I left it. So for many years, as per your question about the entree title, let's say, of the books, I would say I was a lapsed anarchist because I still believed in it, but I didn't practice.
I want to back up to a statement you made earlier about hierarchy structure, and that while structure is necessary at a level, I think what you were saying is, I don't want structure that suppresses the individual's flourishing as an individual, learning, growing, and celebrating life.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, that's absolutely true. So there's a difference between hierarchy that's operational hierarchy from thinking hierarchically. So operational hierarchy is simply somebody's playing quarterback. If we're using football, they call the play. Like, it doesn't mean they're smarter. It doesn't mean they're a better person. And it doesn't mean that the rookie wide receiver on the sideline doesn't notice stuff that the quarterback misses. It just means they're calling the play. If we're in an orchestral metaphor, there's a conductor. It doesn't mean they're necessarily the best mind or whatever. It's just that's their work. And you can't have everybody conducting, or there's no rhythm to the music, right? So from that sense, it makes sense. But from that perspective, it makes sense. But from the hierarchical thinking mindset, it doesn't make sense when we equate hierarchical position with intelligence, creativity, brilliance, insight, etc. And so when that happens, then what you described is an inevitable result, which is people are excluded because they're not at the top. So we wouldn't need their opinion. Whereas we know in nature, you're sitting in front of a beautiful nature, at least on your screen. I don't know where you actually are, but and in nature, the healthiest ecosystems are the most diverse. And this is true in organizational ecosystems too. So what I would suggest, and I've written a lot about it, but most organizations are paying full price, but only utilizing whatever 25% of the ability of the people that they employ, because they're leaving them out of all these conversations when their perspectives and insights could really help. So,
did you ever get into Hannah Arendt and collegial power?
I got some into Hannah Arendt. I actually have one of her books in the back seat of my car, but I don't remember about collegial power, but it sounds aligned to what we're talking about.
So I came to the game through collegial power and non-hierarchical empowerment of people.
Yeah.
And we were doing experiments back in the early 70s. And what we discovered was there was no directionality, there was no order, and there was nothing ever going to get done. So I begrudgingly came to this conclusion you have, that there is a level of differentiation of roles that does not have to mean disempowerment of roles.
Yep. No, absolutely. And In fact, Emma Goldman, going back to anarchism, said, along with Alexander Berkman, they said together that the point of organization is to get people to greatness. That's the point of the organization. So I agree. And so anyway, backing up to the anarchist. So I would say I was a lapsed anarchist because I still believed in it, but I didn't practice. A dozen years ago, when part one of the leadership series that I've been doing was in the works, I was asked to speak at the Jewish Studies Department by Deborah Dash Moore, who was the head of the department. And she had read an essay I had written recently at the time about the history of Jewish rye bread, which was quite a long essay, and she liked it. And so she said, I want to title it like Anarchism on Rye, or Rye Bread and Anarchism, or something, because she knew I had studied anarchists. And I thought, okay, that's cute, whatever, it's a year from now, we'll deal with it later. And then when I got about 3 months out, I was like, man, this is going to be bad, because I haven't even looked at my books in 20 years. I mean, I liked it, but I'm out of touch. And at business conferences, nobody knows anything about anarchism generally, so I'm safe. But now I'm going to Jewish studies, where they actually study these people for a living. I better get my act together. So I went and pulled all my old books out and started to reread them. And I was blown away by two big things. First, how much of what Paul and I and the organization had created was already akin or aligned with a lot of anarchist thinking, even though I hadn't been conscious of it. And even more importantly, had the realization that, as per what you just said about collegial thinking, is that a lot of what's now called progressive business is anarchism. They just don't call it that. So non-hierarchical thinking, self-organizing work teams, chaos theory. I mean, these are all anarchism under other names. And I don't care what the name is, but it just made me realize that so much of what I've been studying in school, and what people like Emma Goldman were going to jail for, women's rights, equity, diversity, are now called progressive business.
I love that phrase, and I haven't heard it, that it's the purpose of business is to support the workers to get to their greatness.
Yeah,
That's
I
not
can find you the
exact
quote
word you
right
used.
now. I happen to have the book under my computer, piling it up to get a better angle. Let me look it up here. Here it says, it follows logically that the greater number of strong, self-conscious individuals in an organization, the lesser the danger of stagnation, and the more intense the organization's vital element. In short, anarchism struggles for a form of social organization that will ensure well-being for all. The reality is that the true function of organization lies in personal development and growth.
I love that what you just said was could also be heard as transformational leadership.
No, absolutely.
21st
right.
century.
Except this came from the International Anarchist Congress in Amsterdam in 1907. No disrespect to you or me.
Well, it actually makes me start thinking, and we're going to have to get to open book in a minute, but I like getting some of the philosophical substrate behind this. Vygotsky, Russian psychologist educator, said that school was only transformational if it transformed the student, the teacher, the school, the curriculum, the school, and the world. And that's probably directly in line with the same stream of thought.
Yeah.
And he was a contemporary of Piaget.
Yep. Yeah. Well, there was a lot of educational focus within anarchist work because they believed that the future was going to come from helping people learn to think free when they were kids, not trying to convert people who had been trained not to think free when they were 30 or 40 or 50. So Ferrer from the modern schools.
I was just about to say, are you talking Freire to me?
Yeah, well, no, not Paulo Freire. That's another guy. But Francisco Ferrer was from Barcelona, was executed by the Spanish government. But the modern schools, which became worldwide, came after his, well, he had started one there, but it came after his execution. And Montessori is very aligned with it. Steiner School is very aligned with it. But anyway.
Well, and also, so it all fits with Freire and liberation education as opposed to suppression education.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got some cool foundation for our conversation, all the way from historic, Russian anarchists to transformational leadership with Bass and Riggio, and how they defined it. Now let's dive in to the open book realities. And we learned open book from you because I'd been following Stack for years.
Mm-hmm.
But until I read about how you guys were doing it, I wasn't interested. But when I saw what you were doing, I thought we could go at it. And then we did the Zing trainings with you and Ann, I think. And then Ron Maurer and Ann actually came down and consulted with us for over a year.
Yeah, it's great. It works.
Well, but we've got some theoretical foundation that gives us a context on individual empowerment. Now, take us into the inner workings of open book as you grew into it.
Well, I mean, there's in a way there's a lot, and another way it's very simple. It's not just showing everybody the financial statements. They're not that interested. I'm not even that interested. There's some key numbers that are super important. This is really about systemically involving everyone in your organization, because this is equally true in not-for-profits as it is in businesses, and could be used in classrooms also for schools. It's about involving everybody in the organization in running the business. It doesn't mean they necessarily have to get the final say, but they're systemically participating, or at least have the chance to participate. If they opt out, they opt out. But in decision making around the business, and it's framed. I'm actually sitting in front of the whiteboard at Zingtrain. It's framed around key operational metrics. The financial statements are also available. It's not like we're hiding it. It's just you don't really need it in the same way that if we were to go to the Bulls game in Chicago, you don't really need to know whatever Michael Jordan or Zach LaVine's shooting percentage in fourth quarter in the last 2 minutes of games in which the Bulls were behind by 10 or more points. Like, somebody has that, and you can get it if you want it. But if you go to the bathroom and you come back and the game's going on, all you really need to know is the score, how much time is left, maybe how many points the leading score. There's 6-7 things you want to know. Beyond that, it's available, but it's not really critical to what you do. So open book is based on a version of translating the Jumbotron scoreboard in a basketball game in an NBA stadium into what we do in the business. So sales, super important. Most businesses, cash is very important. Office supplies, if you're Staples, might be critical. If you're you and me, it's a pretty small number, and I don't need everybody. It's not like we're hiding it. It's just, it's not going to make that much difference, So and then because of our work, we have also woven in non-financial metrics around customer service experience, food quality, whatever it is that we're working on can be woven into it. But the key again is involvement, and then that it's a system. So it's generally a weekly, could be monthly, could be bi-weekly, but generally weekly gathering. We call them huddles, which came from the open book management, the Great Game of Business. It's from their terminology, looking at it like a sport. And it's an hour generally, and it means it's crisp. It's a lot of forecasting. It's a lot of voices. It's not the business manager or the accountant coming in and telling everybody what happened, because they're not interested. If you have a huddle with 15 different lines on a whiteboard, like I have behind me, it might be 10, 12 different people on the lines. So the voices are changing, the conversation's changing, a lot of focus on forecasting, not just on what already happened, but on what you're going to do about it, etc. So it's just a very different way to play the game of business in the language of the book. And I would suggest in hindsight, the old model is a little bit like the workers are playing basketball, but only the coach knows the score. And
You know,
they
I
just
want to
yell
go
at
back.
them.
I want to go back to the what you're going to do about it. How have you built in that level of accountability and responsibility? I loved some of the things that we saw at Zing Train, but tell us from your point of view how you built that responsibility and ownership in.
Well, it's not perfect. Nothing is, but we have our own rules of finance. It's adapted from stuff in the Great Game Book. One of them is what we call the 80-20 rule. It's not the standard 80-20, whatever, Pareto rule. This is in the huddle, you spend roughly 20% of the time where you're, as a line owner, talking about sales or food cost or labor cost or whatever it might be. Only 20% is spent on what happened. 80% of your time is spent talking about what you're going to do. Most organizations, it's like 95 in the past and 5 in the future. And this is much crisper. So it's more like, here's what happened last week. Here's what's coming up. And if they need help, or other people could raise their hand and go, I don't know about your forecast, it seems a little weird, or you forgot about, here we're in Ann Arbor, the U of M Michigan home football game is that week. Don't we need to account for that? Whatever it might be. So most of the time is spent looking at what's going to happen, which gives us time to adjust our behaviors accordingly. The accountability, I mean, all accountability comes from each of us. It's what we decide to do. But the peer pressure and the consistent regimen around having a huddle every week really helps. Because if the same person doesn't do what they say they're going to do, which can happen, but it's always in a group, and it's roughly a lot of the players or people are the same group every week. So it's much easier for me to go, Bob, you said last week you were going to do this, and you're like, it'd be normal. Like, oh my God, I totally forgot. Okay, you'll have it next week. Well, I mean, if again, it's on a list of action steps that we all commit to, right? Quite simple. So if 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks in a row, you're not doing it, it's in front of everybody in a good way. It doesn't require shaming, but it allows for conversation.
Well, I love the 80-20 metric, and I remember learning it with you guys, and I think it's one that we forget.
Yeah, most people do.
It's so much easier to talk about what has been than what I'm going to do.
Or to argue about what could happen. But when you actually have to pin down a forecast and explain why you chose the one you did, and it's your job to do that, it changes the whole dynamic.
Now, how do you work rewards into that? Because this has been a struggle with us. There's a tendency of the staff to actually, if they don't meet their forecast and their plan, to just lower the forecast and the plan. And that's a challenge that we face pretty significantly.
Well, I think that's universal in my experience. One of our rules is it has to tie out. So if they lower the forecast of sales, there's going to be impact on profit or on cash or both, right? So if they aren't tying out, then it's just like, well, whatever, we're going to sell 99,000 instead of 12,000. Oh, well, the problem is when you go out for 8, 10, 12 weeks or whatever, and you start to see you're going to run out of cash and layoffs will commence soon after.
Yeah,
it's a different conversation.
People are going to get to see consequences.
Yeah, and if they don't see that, then and conversely, I mean, it's been hard in the pandemic. I mean, to do forecasting when, like in a restaurant, you don't even know if the dining room is going to be open, right? So I mean, there's all sorts of chaotic factors that have come into play that have somewhat altered the pressures but nevertheless, you still need to tie out. Like running out of cash means it's like you ran out of gas in the car. It's just not going to go. It doesn't matter how much you love the car or how much you wanted to see your grandma. You're still not going to go.
You know, so watching you at the Roadhouse, which is your more formal dining experience, is a thing of beauty, because you're always looking for what's wanted and needed, from clearing a table to pouring water to greeting people. And you really have what we call what's wanted and needed attitude. And so have you always been that way, or how did that develop in you?
Well, it's hard to remember, Bob, as you know, what 40 years ago was really like. But yes, I think I have always been that way, and Paul was always that way. And this goes back to hierarchical thinking. Like, there's no correlation in either of our minds, and probably not in most of our organization still to this day, between I'm the CEO and I shouldn't have to pick up a paper towel off the floor. Like, why would I not? In fact, it's the inverse. It's more important for me to pick it up. So I think that from that perspective, yes, it's always been that way. And then I think I would say, you know, with servant leadership and Robert Greenleaf in mind, et cetera, it's actually more valuable, because when people see the leader doing it, it sends messages, which not everybody notices, but a lot do. And I truly believe if everybody, like if Congress was, everybody did a day a month washing dishes in the congressional cafeteria, it would, the whole country would change. It's just like humility, which I wrote a pamphlet on, is, I would suggest, it's our natural state as human beings. It comes from the same word. In my organizational ecosystem metaphor, humility is humus, which also comes from the same word, which is topsoil. Without it, nothing good grows. It's almost impossible to grow effectively, like the nice picture you have behind you, without topsoil, right? So humility is essential, but it's not what's rewarded in most places. So they lose it. The humility erodes. Doing what you described. Tell me the term that you used again.
What's wanted and needed.
Yeah, so that's humility, because it's no, you can't say, it doesn't work to have that mindset and go like, oh, I'm way too important to bring a coffee to that table. It doesn't even make sense. It's ludicrous, because it's all about what's wanted and what's needed. So you're by definition, you're systemically re-grounding yourself in humility, which is awesome.
So I'm going to take a kind of a turn on this one, because there's humility and there's humanity, and there is being yourself. I was at one of my earliest Sing Train trainings in Ann Arbor with you guys, and I think it was you had one of the brand new employees who had his passport. And he was just about done filling his passport out. And he was in like the warehouse or something in one of the other units other than the deli or the restaurant. And he was called on, and he articulately, with pride, talked about what he was learning, how he was learning it, where he was going. And there was very clear, there was a map, and the values were all around the walls, but they were also woven into the lines that he had a senior staff person sign off for him.
Yeah, which is way more important. I mean, I just had this conversation with somebody the other day. I mean, we actually have our, probably backwards on your Zoom screen, but a statement of beliefs that we actually spent 2 years working on, and we rolled out a year ago, which is not values. That's also, we have that for 30 years. This is beliefs. So not about ethics, just beliefs that we're agreeing to use. And, you know, in a nice way, and she was excited about it, but she's like, well, there's a lot of them. I mean, people can't remember all that. I'm like, no, of course not. the point is that they learn them slowly over time, and they internalize them slowly over time, just like all the behaviors that all of us have learned and internalized.
Okay, so when we do your beliefs book, and which will probably be when we go into self-management,
Mhm.
I'm going to have to see this, because this is clearly a refinement of values to beliefs. And
Yes.
and but we're on open book now, so tell me about
Yeah.
open book values and beliefs.
Well, so in our beliefs, because I happen to have it right here, since I just pulled it out of my bag. Let's see. We believe each person is a creative, unique individual who can do great things in life. So that's the antithesis of most organizations who think frontline people, believe frontline people are sort of losers that are there to fill a task completion role, not to actually think. We believe our success, individual success, can be assessed by how much we help those around us to develop and grow. So people learning how business finance works helps them think like leaders, helps them run their personal finance, reduces their stress at home if they manage their own money better, helps them make better decisions, which makes the business more money, et cetera, et cetera. We believe personal transformation and growth are imperative to our personal and organizational success. So does it work for everybody? No, but if 3 or 4 people out of 100, like, it clicks and they get engaged because of open book, we're all coming out ahead. We believe everyone can excel at more than one thing. So you could be a busboy or a baker, but you could also own the line in the huddle for net operating profit.
Okay.
It's not like it has. So, I mean, I could keep going on and on.
Well,
but
what I'm getting already just with that little bit, and I'm sure, given your belief book, that that this goes in depth. But what's really cool, as I'm listening to you, and I'd like you to expand on it going into other beliefs and stuff, is that we are talking about applied beliefs.
Yeah.
And you've always been willing to talk about the gap between the belief and my behavior or my thinking. So that's that's a, it's woven in. So open book is a codification of beliefs. And your beliefs at Zingerman's aren't necessarily the same beliefs that they have down at, in Springfield, Missouri.
No, but those are closer around open book management than our beliefs would be to the beliefs around this issue between us and Monsanto, let's say.
Okay. So you said that it would be almost impossible for things like Enron and WorldCom to have happened in organizations with open book finance.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because somebody would have asked the questions that the people who are around the top knew should be asked, but nobody wanted to lose their job. If you worked in an open setting, not necessarily around finance, but the way we work, Russia would never have invaded Ukraine because somebody would have said, that doesn't make any sense. Let's talk about it. And I don't want to get into weird politics, but the Supreme Court, regardless of what the decisions are, would have been made after 2 years of national coming together to try to figure out what to do. And I don't want to get into what's right and what's wrong on which side of which, but regardless of the decision, and I can read you a text I got from one of the managers at the Roadhouse. Who said, I thought you would find it amusing that the first thing I thought of when the big case was overturned last week is this is why bottom line change, which is our organizational change process, which is basically open book for change. This is why bottom line change is so precious, and we need to preach and practice it as much as possible. Imagine if if we had used as a country bottom line change, everyone's voice would be heard. Sure,
That's
it's pie
beautiful.
in the sky fantasy to have 100 million people work through a bottom line change, but the spirit of that needs to have happened, and it didn't. And I'm sad that it didn't. And I'll tell you that I know from conversation, caring and open and supportive, that he and I don't actually have the same point of view on the content. But that's not, but we work great together. And it's a totally compassion-based, collaborative conversation where everybody's looking for a way to help everybody get ahead, right? And that's what could be happening. But what happened instead, just again, regardless of content, is a hierarchical decision with no conversation outside of the room of the bosses. And this is what happens.
Well, there's another
tizzy.
What?
It sends everyone into chaos.
Well, there's another level to that story that most of the world doesn't know. So let me just go back to sitting in a Zing training room and seeing the values up. And now I'm going to have to wait to see the beliefs. I know, see the values up. That's a critical piece. Now, let's just hit Enron one more piece. We were brought in to help with the reemergence of Arthur Andersen. And so I got to dig into the structure and what happened at Andersen, who, came down unnecessarily, actually, after Enron, because they were their client. And so Andersen had always had a principles and standards committee, think values, that could say no to any piece of business. And that committee had been saying no to Enron for years, but the committee
took it anyway.
Well, the committee reported to the CEO it was a structural mistake, not the board. So the CEO could overrun the committee, and making money mattered more than the quality and the standards of the company. And so that's part of the story that people don't know, that we got to look at it, restructuring it. So what you're talking about, so that's a disintegrated system where the values, it historically, everybody just agreed. If the value principles and standards committee said no, it didn't happen. But what happened is, as greed or desire for money, whatever, steps in, then that committee gets overridden, and bam, the cost is huge. So say a little bit more about how you really keep the vitality of the values and the beliefs. And I see open book as a critical piece, but I don't think it's the whole game.
No, that's the point of all of what we do is, and it's not in a book yet. Well, it's in pieces in books, but it will become a whole book. But it's just this idea of an organizational ecosystem as a metaphor, right? So in nature, there's never just one thing. It's actually the search for the one thing that's the part of the problem. And so if you have only one way of doing things, it'll work for a lot of things, but inevitably it will be unstable, unsound, or whatever for a lot of other ones. So staying aligned with the values sounds good, but when there's if the people who are in the room benefit from the decision that they're making, and the people who don't benefit aren't in the room, no matter how good you think your intentions are, you're going to slide. I mean, and if you have frontline people in there who have nothing to gain from these terrible decisions, why wouldn't they say anything? Whereas when you're at an upper level, A, you get your own financial gain from it. B, when you're at the top, you don't want to lose your job, et cetera, et cetera. So by not having diversity in the room, it diminishes the quality of the conversation, and the questions that need to be asked never going to get asked.
So diversity is a key element of the health of an ecosystem, as you said at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing is that part of open book is having diverse opinions, respectfully, inclusively challenging each other and building on each other. So it's diversity of opinion is a critical element.
Yeah, and opinion's the manifestation, but diversity of background, diversity of perspective, diversity of thinking, and it needs to be done within the framework that we work with. So if somebody, it's not for me to say that you can't hold racist beliefs, but it's not going to work if you work here and try to practice them. So I'm not saying like everybody should just come in and we can argue about inclusion. Like, we're not going to do that. These are the frames within which we work. Within those frames, we want the diverse perspectives, because I don't want somebody coming in every 50 minutes and going like, are you sure we really want to have an open book management? I mean, it sounds like a helpful question, but it's not, because it's basically challenging the bases of how we work. Every hour, it's impossible to get anything done.
So it isn't permission to just barf out any opinion I have. I'm
No.
bringing my diverse perspective to open book management, to the conversation, to the planning, to the operation.
Yeah.
And so I become an inclusive, diverse element.
Yes. So we have our mission statement. We have our vision. These are real documents that we need to use. We have our values, like our guiding principles that you mentioned. Now we've added this statement of beliefs to that also. So all of these are providing framing for the conversations. It doesn't give the answers, but not to pick on a Supreme Court, but it's not going back to what did Ari and Paul really mean in 1982? Like, we can't change the sandwich because that's what they wrote in 1980. Like, it doesn't make sense, but we do need to have framing for it so that it's not completely, let's turn Zingerman's into a Putin style dictatorship. It seems more efficient. Like, that's not on the table.
Well, yeah, there's, it's interesting. The distinction you're making is that efficiency does not necessarily equal health.
No, and efficiency is confused with effectiveness, and they're not the same. And so, and also the framing through which you judge success. So this is another piece of the ecosystem. It's another conversation as per all these things, but we're very close to completing work on turning the organization into a self-owned business through a tool called a perpetual trust, which is a longer conversation. But the point is, success for us comes from what we talked about earlier, the growth of the people here, and creating something that 50 years after Paul and I have left the planet is still healthy and contributing to the community, right? It's akin to an old growth forest. This typical business model is success comes from clear cutting. The only point of planting a forest was to cut it so you could get the money. This is, you plant the forest so that you can have a forest. And yes, we want some money en route, but the point of the work is not the money. I'm not down on the money, but it's one element of the ecosystem, not the point of the ecosystem.
Well, so ecosystem is right outside my window here, is our reconstructed prairie.
Yeah, I see it.
Oh, that's actually behind us a bit, and that's what it'll look like in the next 2 weeks. But I was out walking today, and I was scoping out, and we plant and we built the prairies. We have almost 2 acres of original prairie, and we've built another 30 acres of prairie. However, I did not understand prairie management, and you have certain bad players.
Yep.
And that just invade and push everybody else out.
Yep.
And so I'm starting to look at trying to catch up with, and parts of the prairie are just gorgeous. They're just rich and lush. And then there are parts that are just bereft of richness. And they've got a number of problematic elements to them that I did not know to watch for when we planted it 25, 27 years ago.
Yeah, makes sense.
But
if you hadn't learned anything in 27 years, it wouldn't seem like.
Oh, unfortunately, I'm just learning some of it now, but we won't talk about that. I'm a little slow to the game, and I'm playing catch up now. And so, but with the open book, so what happened is I watched some of the degeneration happen, and I felt terrible because I didn't know what to do.
Right.
And it's only in the last 2 years I've thought of what to do. The nice thing about open book is you're doing it is with your weekly huddles, you are theoretically requiring that we all bend our minds to optimal functioning on a weekly basis.
Yeah, and we're teaching people how to run a business, because one of the beliefs I didn't get to is that everybody's 100% responsible for the health of the organization, no matter what job they have. Right? Well, it's hard to be effectively responsible if you have no clue. It's like, you could bring me there and tell me I'm responsible for the prairie, but I don't know what to do. So it's not that helpful. I need
So
training
how
in
do you
to
maintain that attitude?
the same way you maintain anything. It's a lot of work. I mean, it's modeling, it's teaching it, it's clear expectations, it's reaffirming when it works well, it's gently correcting course when it doesn't, it's helping change people's language to get them out of saying, like, I love that that Zingerman's does this. I'm like, you are Zingerman's. You mean we.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, do you know about our talents and stakers economy?
No.
Do you know Mondragon?
Yeah, totally.
So we go to different spiritual communities just about every year. And when we were in Mondragon, some of our finance folks started going, well, yeah, of course, they're valuing the worker. It's Catholic worker philosophy. But they said, we're still not at a level of really valuing the individual and honoring the individual's impact on others, individuals. So we started what we call the talent economy. If you say something that lifts me up, I give you a talent. Or something that lifted you up, I give you a talent. If you say something that tears you or me down or somebody down, I give you a stinker. And so we're monitoring the beliefs, because the beliefs you're talking about, you're neutral, creative, or destructive, they're coming out of our sentences all the time. And so that's our tool to support each other, to catch our thinking and rematrix, we call it, or reprogram ourselves.
Yep, totally. Yep.
So
yeah, an open book is a way to do that around all kind of things, right? So most hourly employees in the world, not on a malice, but they've been raised with the belief that their perspective is not interesting to the business. Like, they voice it at home, they voice it at the bar after work, they voice it in the bathroom, but they don't voice it in the conversation. This is just bringing those, they have the opinions. It's just the people who are making the decisions don't hear them. This is where you systemically bring it into the same room as best you can. I mean, it's still imperfect, of course, but if you get more of it in the room and you help to discredit the side conversations when people aren't willing to come forward into the place where they're welcome, and then they're mad, their opinion is kind of, the credibility is reduced significantly.
We're just now starting to realize that some people aren't going to talk enough and really deal in.
Yeah.
And we've always had our paired sharing and our group sharing, and we're starting to really build it into every line that it really invites everybody to think into each line, whether it's theirs or not.
Yeah. Makes sense. I mean, this is never done. I mean, like, there's a lot I should be doing in the world that I'm not doing too. I mean, nobody's doing everything. I mean, it's, so it's just that more people engaged is better than less. People who could come but choose not to is much healthier than people can't come.
Okay, so the first law of a non-diverse ecosystem is degeneration. It'll degenerate to a monoculture.
Okay.
What I see you setting up is a generative culture that actually creates its own differentiation.
Yeah, that's the idea.
I just found a plant in our first prairie we rebuilt that's called carrion weed.
Mm-hmm.
We never planted it. I have no clue where it came from, but it's there. And there's one example I've found of it so far. And I was looking at some invasive plants that I wanted to take out. And amidst those invasive plants was carrion weed. And I think that's kind of cool. And it's called carrion weed because it stinks like rotting corpses. And so I think that's the other challenge, is that we can catch and honor those new diversities that emerge.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now, we know one of the things you do is, it's not inherent in open book, but if somebody wants to open a new business and become a partner, you've got just a very detailed process. So if I say, I want to become another part of the Zing family, I was there when the Korean restaurant got started.
Yep.
Did she make it through the pandemic?
Yep.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good, because she was still just doing her summer cart.
Oh no,
when I was there.
She's still going. I mean, it's hard, it's a hard business. But anyway, yes. I mean, the other piece of that is the bottom line change that I mentioned before, because opening a business is a big deal, but initiating a small change is a good way to practice what leadership really is, with minimal risk.
For example,
anybody that wants to start a change, we have the recipe for how to do it. And then if I do my job well, like I tried to do last night, we'll see how it goes, is to just encourage people who are still somewhat on the periphery to engage with the organization by leading a change that they want, right? So they're used to the old model. They just tell the boss and he or she or whatever decides what to do. And then a good boss in their mind will do it and a bad boss won't. But what I want is, good idea, start leading. Here's the recipe for how you do it. So
I love the way you have that defined for people. We've got a couple minutes left. Any final words for our students and our listeners on open book, for us to, work and think about?
Well, I just think the other model that people are used to, which is the one Paul and I started with too, it makes no sense. It's just what everybody's used to. Like I said very quickly before, I mean, it's a little bit like everybody in your company's playing basketball, but only the coach and the general manager, maybe the assistant coaches, know the score, and they just keep yelling at the players to play harder. And the players got no idea whether there's 1 minute left, 20 minutes left. They don't know if they're winning by 2, losing by 2. They don't know if they're winning by 2 or winning by 200. And it requires very different strategy. And when they don't know what's going on, then they just revert to what they know, which is a 10-year-old in a toy store.
So we've got inclusion in the data and inclusion in the activity and the what of the data.
Yeah. And then everybody comes out ahead, because there's things that people on the front line or whatever will notice that as the leader, we don't notice. I mean, it's not that one person's smarter. It's just you're looking from a different angle. You're going to see different things. Second, they're growing and learning. So the quality of their decisions are going to get better. People in most hierarchical settings live with the delusion or illusion that they're the only ones making decisions, but everybody's making decisions all day long. Should I hustle or not hustle? Should I be nice to this customer, or should I treat them, kind of cursorily or rudely? Should I go back and double check the quality on the product, or should I just not worry about it because I'm off in an hour? Like, I mean, these are just, everybody in every business is making thousands of decisions a week. So the bosses in those businesses have this illusory concept that they're the decision maker, but it's crazy. So if the people on the front line have bad information, how can they make good decisions?
Well, thank you for the beacon that you're holding, and also for the purity of your dedication to Ann Arbor. That's almost another issue for us to talk about, responsibility of the corporation to its physical environment.
Well, yes, it's a long conversation, but I believe it's appropriate, and it would be a little, the other way is a little bit like, Bob, you have such a great prairie. Let's put it in New Mexico, and let's put one in Manhattan too. We can really clean up on this. It doesn't make sense. Like, it's great for southeastern Wisconsin, which I assume is where you are. It's beautiful, but it's completely wrong for Florida or, Jamaica or Western Canada.
Amen. Thank you so much, Ari. And it's so good to talk to you again.
Always a pleasure, sir.
I got to make it up there.
Yeah, come on up. I'm here.
And I'll dig into the beliefs. Thank you, Ari.
Okay. Take care.